All right. Happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope that today finds you well. Thank you so much for joining us again and again. We appreciate you. This Wednesday, it's going to be power packed. Get your tea and something fine to drink. I decided to pull out my red cup today. Because it's going to get juicy. So today I have an amazing panel that I would like to introduce to you. Go ahead, Christian, start us off.
All right, I'm Christian Harley. 8 years I've been in the field teaching. Like I was telling the panel before, this is the Jordan years for me. I think, and, it took Jordan 7 years to start winning rings. I feel as though it's about that time for me to come out of my shell. Um, I look forward to being on this panel, and it's going to be a great night.
All right, Mr. Bond.
Man. Happy Wednesday. I'm so grateful that you guys took the time out of your evening and spend some time with us. I'm Melvin Bond. I am an educator, and I'm looking forward to changing lives one day at a time, but specifically just sharing some insight about how education can change all of us and working together to make a difference.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. And Principal of the Year.
Of course, I would not unmute. Hey, everybody. Maisha Riddlesberger, principal and educator. I've been principal for 12 years now, in education for 21, which seems like a really long time, but time flies when you're having fun. Love what I do. Love my community. I'm here representing historic Anacostia in Washington, D.C., as well as my former district and my former love of Compton Unified School District.
Thank you very much. And to the lovely Dr. Riggins.
Hi, everyone. Sunday Riggins here, proud principal of a DC public school in Ward 8 in the Washington Highlands area. This is my 10th year as a principal, and I have been in education for 20 years. So yes, love what I do. Definitely really passionate about making sure that I provide students with equity opportunities and just a multitude of supports to make sure that we strengthen and enrich their lives. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time out to just share with audiences across the country about the current state of education. A shout out to Cohort 9 new leaders. I definitely appreciate all for the last 4 weeks, we've had new leaders joining us from across the country. And indeed, it's an honor that we're still able to keep in contact. I do want to provide a disclosure that the panelist discussion are specific and based to his or her perspective and values, research, and area of expertise. Discussions are not reflective of any of the panelists' workplace, higher education institution, or constitutes place of employment. If there's any interruptions with Zoom bombing or racial insensitivities, we do ask for forgiveness in advance. As the moderator, I will work to maintain decorum, but we are all here with the same common goal, and that is to serve children, and specifically children of color. For anyone that may be joining, just FYI, we're going to save some Q&A for the end. So panelists, as you just come up with different questions or you have different thoughts, feel free to chime in, and we're just going to piggyback off of each other and just have a discussion that's going to benefit the good of the people. So for question number 1, and I'm going to give this to Mr. Bond, can there be success in a virtual world?
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott. So there can be success in a virtual world. It's a journey of how you get there, and that every single person has a different path. There's not one path that works for every single body. It can't be like a universal cookie cutter, if you may, because everybody has different needs, and resources have to be pulled that work for that specific area. And so what I've learned in this time that we're in right now is that it shows us no matter
Oh no, you're cutting out. We can't hear you, Bond. Maisha, pick up.
you can find success.
Oh, there he is.
In the virtual world, you can find success.
Absolutely. Maisha, what's your take
Yeah.
from an elementary perspective?
Yeah, I think from the elementary perspective, the virtual world is really hard, right? But I think there are so many opportunities for success because the kids are so young. Parents will have to be there with some of our youngest learners. But I think this, as educators, gives us an opportunity to define what success looks like and help teachers, staff members, parents, and families create that backwards map from our collaborative definition about what success looks like in the virtual setting. So when I think about success for us, I think about the opportunity that we have here. We have an amazing opportunity for 5-year-olds, for 3-year-olds, for 7-year-olds to become more tech savvy and more proficient than us in a way that I know back when I was going to school, it definitely wasn't even an option. So when I think of the success, I think a lot of times we focus on the challenges that we have, of which there are many. Please make no mistake that there are many challenges, especially for younger kids. But I think when we think of the success, we think about kids being more engaged, kids using tech tools and being able to have access to and use tech tools in order to engage with content in a way that they haven't before. And we know with the new, with our world that we live in, where technology is kind of king, that giving kids access to those technological tools to expand their knowledge outside of a traditional classroom is a number one success in itself. And we can't discount that as we're thinking of the many challenges of virtual learning. But I also think the success in virtual learning lies in students becoming more confident in their abilities, right? When you were on a Zoom call like this, when you don't have that one-to-one like touch with your teacher to help you in your time of need, students also build up their confidence and they become more independent as well when we think about success in the virtual world. So I think for every school leader, for every school community, really thinking of like, what does success look like? What is it that we want to take from this very unique time? And then plan backwards from that. What do we need to do to set up teachers for success? What do we need to do to set up students for success? And what do we need to do to support families so that they feel successful as well?
Yeah, I appreciate that elementary perspective. I wonder, for students who are a little older, has it been harder for them to transition to being open to learning and being more technologically savvy? Harley, what do you think?
I don't think so, because a lot of what they do is tech based. You think about the children these days, from the TikTok videos to um, Twitter and everything that they do with their phones and technology. I think that they know how to use it. I think the struggle comes in where, for teachers, we have to learn these apps and then teach the kids how to use the apps for education outside, and not, their normal music videos and things like that. I think it helps as well, like Maisha was saying, in building them for the future. If we look at what's going on, we're probably in another shift in the paradigm. If we think about the industrial revolution of the early 1900s, where everything was going in the factory base, we're coming out of an agricultural society. I think we're going into a technological society now, where the future they have to know how to use these things. And I think in the classroom, by shifting and teaching in the way that we do now, we're helping students learn that they have freedom to do their work at their own pace while still having that structure from the teachers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I wonder, one of the things that concerns me is that nationally, looking at educational reforms, we have not acknowledged the need for this technological shift. So you think of ESSA as the last reform, and we really haven't paid much attention to reform and policy work during this administration. So I'm hopeful that for the next 4 years, we'll have this very fine look at what is needed as we look at the landscape of education to support students across all sectors. Sunday, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would just say that I think it's very interesting, and I think we all just in this era of our new normal being virtual. I think that it's funny now that kids have devices in their hands. There's so many things that are coming up around just ed tech, like how do you do certain things? And I think that this sort of also goes back to when we started standardized testing on devices. Like it's interesting that conversation didn't come up to say, we actually need to make sure that we get these devices in the hands of kids before they take a park assessment or something like that, so that they can be more savvy. And it just makes me wonder, had we done that 5 years ago, would we even be in this same situation of saying that we needed to make sure that technology, we gave kids one-to-one, we made schools one-to-one, since we knew that they would be taking an assessment that was online? Why didn't we follow suit with devices? Because I would just want to hope that 5 years later, this now happening at the end of 2019, 2020, kids would have been way ahead of the game. And so I think that this pandemic is forcing us to put technology in the hands of kids. And it's actually something that should have happened 5 years ago, in alignment with park testing and deciding that we were going to go computer-based for testing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You know, last school year, students still had to sit for advanced placement exams, which I know you know well. And what I learned is that they curved the exam. So you had still a lot of students in suburbia and even some students in rural who did very well, exceedingly well. So AP scores were some of the highest scores in history. However, students, Black and Brown students, specifically in impoverished large districts, and I would imagine some small, but of course they look at the larger number when doing the trend data, how bad we did. And part of doing so bad was not being used to having timed exams on the computer. So you figure that even though park is, if you are in high school, you only take park one time while you're in high school, and that's grade 10. Most students that are taking AP exams are in 11th and 12th grade. So they still have this huge gap with using technology for as an assessment tool versus, as you talked about, Christian, you know, TikTok, Facebook, well, they don't use Facebook, but Instagram, whatever the situation may be.
Oh, you're old Facebook.
Right. You know, I know I'm old. And so it's this huge disparity, you know? And so I completely agree with you, but I wonder, schools were forced to put technology in the hands of children. Do you believe the onus is on the schools to do it? And anyone can take the question.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about equity, if we're wanting to make sure that we're being equitable for all students, I think that schools, districts, and schools do take that responsibility for educating and teaching our children, because we know that children that grow up in families that may not that may have a higher socioeconomic status, they already have access. There's an entry point and there's an access for those families already, and that access point is through their family, right? Through their family experiences. And unfortunately, for some students in settings like the ones that I serve in, that access point isn't there because of financial restrictions, because of monetary time restrictions. And so I think if we're talking about being equitable, and just as Sunday was saying earlier, we are really talking about going into a digital space where we're being assessed digitally. There's digital learning standards, but we have an entire population who doesn't even have access to that through no fault of their own, that we have to, if we have the resources, which I think schools have proven, we have to take the onus in making sure that we bridge that gap if we want true equity. Because my children's experience can't be different from a child uptown, just because unfortunately they don't have the financial resources to compete and learn these digital standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I add to that, Doc? And definitely with the equitable piece, I always thought that in our urban schools, the technology has to be updated. Because we've seen plenty of times where we give children certain Chromebooks, but they're 4 or 5 years old, versions of technology. And we know that technology changes every year, but definitely every 4 or 5 years, certain things are faster. And when we give children these computers, they have to be able to work. Now, some of the onus also has to go into the children to take care of the tech when they have it. But I think we have to push more into, legislation to provide schools with the funding for more adequate technology.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I'm reminded, I went to, when I transitioned from Baltimore City to Baltimore County, I was at the largest middle school in the county, 1,200 students. And this was in 15, and they still had floppy disk.
Wow.
it's something unheard of, and you think like, oh, a suburban school, they have better resources. I would imagine 60% of the folks serving in Baltimore City believe Baltimore County, like the grass is always greener. It's what everybody always thinks. But you realize the disparity of the resources for certain groups of students, even in large districts. All right, let's talk about the strategies that we can offer educators. And so typically around this time, we have been endowed with professional development, and we are supporting educators because we're typically preparing for formal observations. And so I'm just wondering, like, how are we supporting educators during this time? Are we doing observations? Are we still having this learning continuum? Sunday, are you offering any support, or do you know of any administrators offering specific support to their educators?
Yes, I think that something I know that has been really helpful at my school has been, we decided that we were going to order just some text. So we ordered the distance learning playbook. There's Tech Like a Champion. I think, yes, it's Tech Like a Champion, and a few other books. And we also ordered Just Mercy. We ordered that last year and didn't get to take that out, and just there's another book called Launch that we ordered about like design thinking and innovation. We also ordered a book called Lifelong Kindergarten. So we decided that we were going to do some book groups just so that people could pick something that they wanted to read, sort of be in this affinity group with another colleague, and to either like focus on tech. If you wanted to focus on social justice, you could focus on that and read Just Mercy. And so I think it's difficult because in some communities, like my school, we're heavily relational. So everybody relies on like seeing each other in the morning, talking, eating lunch together, and all of those kinds of things. So it's really a challenge to figure out, how do I create spaces for people to have conversations, and not conversations focused on, man, this technology isn't working, or look at the state of politics in our country, look at, what's happening in a Black Lives Matter movement. I think all of those things are important, but it's also tempering and sort of remembering that people still need other things to talk about, to not get so saturated in everything that is happening, because it's super heavy. So you don't know that if you do open up those spaces for people to talk about those other things, what you could be triggering and what you could be creating and getting people just kind of down and out. So I think the book groups have been helpful, because that's now getting people in a space of like, oh, let's talk about something else. Maybe we're talking about the strategies in this book. Maybe we're talking about social justice. And I think those things are still connected to where we are. Like, we are in a space of virtual learning. We are in the midst of like, social unrest and social justice advocacy efforts, but it gives people just a different spin and frame to talk about it. So that's something that I'm very excited about. And it also gets people talking that don't normally either work on the same grade level team, because now people are just picking topics based on what they're interested in. We have staff meetings once a week. We throw icebreakers in, we put up memes and all these other things. Definitely realizing I probably could have had less in-person meetings now that I've been in this space of having meetings that are virtual. But we just try to have fun. I don't think there's really a recipe to it. I think it's just remembering that people are human and people need that connection. And the same way that we're reaching out to kids and having small groups and all of that, teachers need that space too. And they need space to talk about what's going on, but they need space to talk about other things. They need you to reach out. They need to feel encouraged. So I think it's a lot. I think it's just going with kind of the pulse, trying to keep a pulse on your team, and then knowing sort of what things to put in place proactively to make sure that you're sort of reaching and feeding everybody's hungers during this time.
And that is a recipe, right? So I know you said there's no specific recipe, but you have the recipe down pat. And every administrator needs a recipe, because this is the reality. We're in a pandemic. we're in a national crisis, not just one, but multiple. And so the trauma of that impacts just every area of your life. And so it really is important as leaders to make sure that you are leading people where they don't feel attacked and they feel like it's a safe space. And so one of the things that I grappled with is like creating a safe space when you're a high touch person, but you don't have the high touch to create the safe space. Anyone else want to add on?
Yeah, I definitely did, because I was getting excited when you were talking about the different groups. I think giving people the chance, educators the chance to process that window. We have resources available for our kids, we have resources available for our families, but at the same time, somebody has to help the heroes. Somebody has to be there for them to kind of connect and like recharge. And like you said, change the frame. Like sometimes you just got to remember why you woke up in the morning and why you got into this in the first place. And oftentimes you can kind of get your wheels stuck and you forget about how hard you fighting. And sometimes in life, we just get these reminders about, oh, this is the impact of what I'm doing. Oh, this is the impact of where these families and these students have an opportunity to be. And oftentimes, at the end of the day, sometimes we still as adults got to figure out how to say, I need help. It's okay to process and say, I'm not feeling well. Can you come, can I have a moment with you? And giving adults that opportunity to kind of connect with one another. Talking sometimes in our communities is really difficult because you don't want to feel vulnerable and you don't want to be exposed. But at the end of the day, the things that make us different are the things that really tie us together. The things that you didn't know that you had in common with someone down the hall. You find out that you're just learning more. So I can appreciate being able to connect. I know where I am, we decided to do more morning meetings, and we decided to do stress management ideology. So you could go to see like mindfulness. You can go practice mindfulness. And so those are some of the things that we've done as well for our educators.
Can I add on? And I really agree with that point of the morning meetings, Doc. That was your specialty last year when we were together. The morning meetings, sometimes you like, I got to wake up for this. But then when you get into the meeting, it's like a refresher, as you say, or energizer to say, all right, now I'm ready for the day, because we got into this meeting and it wasn't so much of a meeting of this is what you do X, Y, Z. It was a meeting of how are you doing today? Let's play this game here, just to get you in the mood to get ready to go into a classroom and teach. Because for someone like me, I live off the energy of the kids. Like I have to be in the classroom with them. Like I tell my little jokes within the lesson here and there, when the kids laugh, I'm ready to roll, and it keeps me going. So this whole talking to the screen is like, it's a drag. You wake up in the morning like, all right, I got to go sit in front of this computer and talk to the screen. Hopefully I have some kids that show their face. Where I'm at, we can't force them to turn their cameras on. So I probably get maybe one kid with a camera on now. So it's kind of difficult. But when you have those energizers, it's something that keeps you going, to put that battery in your back to say, all right, you can do this today. So go ahead, let's get going. So I definitely agree. That's one strategy, I think, as from the teacher's perspective, that really works is the morning meetings. And I can say another strategy that I can say for educators, as far as being able to channel the children a little bit better, if you have kids that are kind of standoffish or don't want to join in on the Zoom. Because once again, like for me, I'm in a new county this year. So it's tough. I'm learning a whole set of new kids and I can't really see them. I don't know who they really are. I'm talking to them virtually. Some things that I implement is using music. I use instrumental beats in the background. I let that kind of feed the flow of the classroom. I use the chat. I mean, I'm in there sounding like I'm teaching Forex or something, the Forex market. I'm in there, drop a 7 in the chat. If you can hear me, if video works, put a 66 in the chat. You're having a good day, give me 55 and this, that, and the third. And the kids really interact like that, right? Because even those kids that don't want to talk, they'll come in and they'll say, all right, well, he said put a 7 if you're feeling good. And then I say, well, all right, if you're not having such a great day, give me a 4, right? And I'll couple kids that drop the 4 in there. And then that's where you get, reach out to them and say, all right, well, if you're not feeling so great today, such and such is going to happen. We're going to have a pretty good day and that's going to get better. Also, the breakout rooms, right? Giving kids a chance to go in that room without the teacher there. And maybe they have conversation going. Man, I can tell you last week, we talked about the debates and the kids had my chat booming. I was like, man, what's going on in the chat? I'm in there having discussion with the kids, and then I in the chat, and I'm like, wait a minute. Like, these 5 kids are really having an in-depth discussion. And so it's a chance to really bring them in and say, all right, let's have that discussion out loud. And they really find their voice. So if you having problems like really engaging those kids and making them have discussion, use that chat. The chat will work for you.
Yeah, I definitely think there are so many ways in which virtual learning is working for a lot of students. But the reality of it is that there's lots of ways where this is having a negative impact on children for a lot of different reasons, whether it's a resource issue, an access issue, just, kinesthetic issue. I mean, we can just begin to name them specifically for our vulnerable population, whether it's our students with disabilities, our ESOL students, our students that are at risk students, that because of where they are, they're having, more trauma than in other situations. Can you begin to share different strategies in which you or a member of your team or someone is helping that vulnerable population?
For my wife, she's a behavior specialist at a charter school in DC. Um, in her job, it's kind of difficult, and within the building, she would be pulling kids out of the classroom, taking them to her office where they meet one-on-one and discuss whatever it is that, the kid has to discuss with her. And I've seen they do this thing where they pull kids into a breakout room from their classroom within their learning setting. So if they're in period 1, she deals with elementary age. So if they're in their first block, she goes in and takes whatever kids she needs out, takes them into a breakout room for a few minutes. She does, various games and tactics. I can't get into too much detail of how she does it because I'm in the middle of doing my thing when she's on. But from when I do hear her upstairs, it's like some great work going on. I think that breakout room feature is really key for those kids that struggle.
Mm-hmm. Maisha, what are you guys doing?
Yep. So I think as summer, as we were doing our plans on what we were going to do to support kids, we really wanted to focus on the whole child, right? So like exactly what you just said, Christian, and making sure that our mental health team members were pulling groups, working with kids in the same way that we would do in the traditional setting if we were meeting face to face. So utilizing the technological space, utilizing like separate calls. We use the Microsoft Teams platform in DC Public Schools. So you can call kids in. As long as you have their name, you could call them into a group and their laptop starts buzzing away. But we really focused on creating these multi-tiered systems of support groups in order to support our children that may be experiencing homelessness, that may have requested counseling services. We partner with Community of Hope. So we have a Community of Hope social worker. We also partner with DBH, Department of Behavioral Health. So we have that social worker in addition to our social worker that's assigned to our school community. So they are working with children to do groups. They are working with children and families to provide additional support. What we found is that everybody has to take an all hands on deck approach to helping our families with tech, right? So we created like a one sheet with one pager for them so that they knew how to access tech. We're open during the pandemic. There's always some member of our team there, our operations team, to help families, because when we talk about vulnerable families, sometimes the vulnerability lies in the lack of experience with tech. And once parents have someone to show them how to, kids have someone to show them how to, then they soar. So we really work on making ourselves available. My Department of Behavioral Health clinician is actually starting a grief group, because we know that during the pandemic, students have experienced grief through the traditional way in our community, which is often with community violence or gun violence, but they've also had an added extra layer of people getting sick and not really knowing how to process at 5, 6, 7, 10 years old, coronavirus and like the detrimental effects to like communities and families. So we started a grief group for those, and we've been publicizing that to our families. So our DBH clinician can help kids process through that grief, because we know if there's blocks mentally, it makes it hard to focus in class. When you're in person, it makes it almost impossible to focus when you're in front of a computer, and some of those same issues that are blocking the learning when you're coming to school are right there in your vicinity when you're at home learning. So we really try to create multiple spaces and opportunities for members of our mental health team and our teaching team to check in with students and families in order to make sure they're okay. We still have many of the same students that we had last year, so we know which students need the extra love, which need the extra touch point. So we make sure that they're on someone's caseload so that they can reach out to the students and families to provide them any support that they need.
Yeah, that's amazing. One of the things you said that I'm like thinking about is the traditional way of dealing with deaf is based upon community issues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would have defined that as traditional. So that's really interesting. I know that specifically in Ward 7 and 8 over the last couple of months, they've experienced a high increase in community violence. I know that it had a huge impact for high school students. Do elementary students truly understand, or is a part of the process is getting them to understand what they're truly experiencing emotionally?
Yeah, and I think Sunday, like I think both of us are so have the unfortunate experience of dealing with a lot of community violence. I think the process at elementary, at least for me, at our school, is getting kids to understand why they're angry. So many times they're asking at home, like, why did this happen to so-and-so? Why did this happen to my uncle, to my neighbor? And parents are in their own grief, right? And so sometimes parents have really strong coping mechanisms that they share with kids that they bring with them to school, and they even want to share in grief group. And sometimes parents don't have those skills or haven't talked to their students about it, so they don't know how to process those emotions, and those emotions show up in a variety of different ways. Some students can be withdrawn, some students could be more aggressive in their behavior, and it all depends on the child. But I think creating the opportunity for them to discuss it sometimes may bring some of those feelings to the surface. And it may be rough for a little while when those feelings come to the surface, because students have suppressed them. But in order for them to move forward and past the feelings that they're inevitably going to feel from community violence, we have to create a space in our school setting for them to process those emotions with someone that's truly there to help them process.
My wife is in here clapping you up right now for that.
Hey, wife.
Hey, today I actually had a meeting with the Drama Doctors. They're a group that service in specifically the Maryland, DC area. And when we were speaking today, they talked about that they've increased their support with helping schools with parents, and that they have finding out that so many schools need help communicating effectively with parents because there seems to be the communication gap has widened. Has anyone else experienced or noticed that they've had to do extra work, provide additional support and resources, specifically to the parents as we're in virtual learning?
Yes, I've seen some parents that needed additional support, but it was from.
Oh, you're cutting out again. I know that was good too. What a bummer.
You get it back?
Yeah, for sure. Sunday, what about you?
Yeah, we similar to some of the things that Maisha shared, we have school open. I think the school physical building being closed, I think it's really showed us just like as much as we're in this era of if you'd like to speak to a representative, push this, but it's all of these other, even though it's automated and like everyone is used to that, some people just cannot handle it. It's not helpful. And even when you do the one pager and when you do orientation, like I was there for the orientation and went over all the steps with like every family that came in during device distribution, and still people were calling back like, okay, what did you say to do again? And it makes me just think about how when like like stepping in people's shoes, because I think there's a part of it that people are like, oh, the digital divide, kids need devices and that kind of thing. And they did, but there's a whole piece around that in just being accessible to families and whatever it is that they need. Because if they come in and say, hey, I need tech support, and then they start, you start asking, how's your uncle so-and-so doing? Oh, girl, he had COVID, and then this happened and that happened. And so just in that kind of relational, conversational way, you start finding out other things that families need, and then you can offer it. Because it's also an assumption that all families are in a place to be asking for things, which they are not. A lot of families come in and people are sort of suffering in silence, whether it's like loss of loved ones, people they know that were impacted with COVID, on top of community violence and some of those things that are happening, and just successive losses. And so that being in the schoolhouse and starting with tech as the reason why they're there sometimes can turn into other things, and people being vulnerable and telling you what else they need, and then you can connect them. So I think in this virtual space, that is something that is missing, because when you are in schools that are very relational, all of those things come by conversation and sort of by chance. Even when you have the structures there, you also want to respect people's privacy and also like their own like vulnerability and where they are as people, and to say like, I want you to feel like you can come to me, but I don't also want you to feel like that's the only thing I'm focused on. So we have people at school pretty much every day. You can come there. If you need tech support, you can get tech support. If you need to check on something, some people come and say, hey, I need copies of these documents because I have to go to this office and turn them in for whether it's assistance or something else that they're trying to do. So we just do all of that. Of course, there are things like if you need support, if you need to talk to a social worker, but there's a whole other host of things like, can you read this? I need to submit this application, or I'm applying for something. I need a copy of this document. It's a whole host of things that people come in for. And so we just try to orient ourselves in a very customer service stance and say that like whatever people are coming in for, we're going to try to help them in any way that we can. And the reality is that when people are walking in a school, it's like we're like one of the only places that's actually open and can help. So it's a wide range of things that people come in for. And the best thing you can do is, be positive and try to help them with what you can, because a lot of people are carrying just such heavy loads. And, a part of that unloading process is knowing that there's someone there to help you, and someone that, even if it's not something related to tech or virtual learning, if I have it and I can help you with it, I'm going to provide it.
Yeah, as I think about, many school districts shared this week that they're going to be reopening. You have large conversations happening nationally about the controversy of whether or not, I'm a teacher, should I don't feel comfortable going in, or parents. I mean, you just have stakeholders that are at up in arms right now about whether or not buildings should open. But the truth of the matter is that in most communities, for most sectors, the schoolhouse is really the nucleus for many communities. Let's get to the heart of it. How do you really feel about opening? And we understand my belief that it's truly beneficial for children, but I realize that there's so many other stakeholders that have such reservations. Harley, what are your thoughts?
Me personally, I look at it from two sides. Like I want to go back in the building, right? I feel like, and I made this post on Facebook a couple of days ago, maybe last week. Like I feel like a comedian that's been out of work for months, right? It's like there's something missing from the whole teaching experience when I'm not there with the kids. But then as a father and a husband, I'm loving being at home with my family every day, right? I love that aspect of it. But then there's the professional in me and saying, look, I'm ready to get back on my stage. I'm ready to go grab a mic, find my audience and bring them in, and let's get these laughs going. And while you laughing, you're gonna learn something from me. So for me, I'm ready to go back. But I do understand the whole idea that people are scared of the pandemic, right? There's a real fear of going into a building, especially dealing with, you're talking upwards of hundreds of kids. You don't know where they've been when they were out and about. before they came to school. You don't know where some of your staff, some of your colleagues have been before they came to work. Heck, you could have went to Home Depot two hours or 2 days before you went into work. And so there's this whole aspect of the unknown, right? And I think that's where the biggest fear for people is, the unknown. But as far as me personally, I'm ready to get back in there and get things rolling.
Now I hear you, but I'm just gonna push the envelope a little bit with you. So you have a 1.5-year-old.
Right.
Do you have reservations about being with so many students and the impact of your own child?
No, because I don't how do I say it? I don't really have fear like that. I believe in speaking things into yourself. And I believe that if you really sit there and you take care of your body, you go and you take your vitamins, you have your immune system right, things will take care of itself. And I don't really bring that thought of bringing it home to her, and that's why since the pandemic's happened, like I did was doing landscaping. I was still going out doing things and then coming home. But you still take extra precaution. You washing your hands and things like that when you come in, change your clothes. But I don't have that thought of bringing it home to her because I don't foresee that. I don't really put that in my mind.
Okay. Melvin, I'm going to push the envelope with you because you and your wife are educators too. You have a 5-year-old. What are your thoughts?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I have this Superman complex where I feel like I just have to be there to save everybody. I got to be there to save my wife. I got to be there to save my daughter. I got to save all my staff. I got to save all my kids. And I don't want to go back until it's safe because I feel like, what if I'm not there? Like, what could I have done to keep you from getting sick? What could I have done to keep that child from being compromised? I think we're in a position right now, we're talking about lives being compromised, like it's life or death. And it kind of bothers me just a little bit that we're just not ready to kind of be in like you tell a small child, and it's beautiful to hear the perspective of our leaders from an elementary perspective. I can't imagine telling a young child they can't hold hands or they can't go give a high five or they can't give a hug to one another walking down the hall. Or even like I'm in high school and when you had technology day and I was outside, guys, stay on these markers. Don't move past these markers. Stay 6 feet. Keep your mask on. And I mean, I couldn't stop the congregating and they wanted to hug you. What are you going to tell them that you can't have a hug? I'm not that guy. I'm with Harley with that. I will not deny a hug, but I am going to hold the line with making sure that we're doing everything health wise. I want to make sure that our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted. I don't know if we'll ever have the answer to that, but I do know that, I think about home. Like you are the king of your home. You have to make sure that everything is okay. And so I take on that when I go to school and when I'm working in my institution. And it's just kind of like one of them things where, family is first. Family is first. And then you got to make sure your health is right. And so how as leaders do we make sure that we talk about education being an equalizer and we talk about, making sure that people succeed, how do we still keep that in the forefront that, I want you to come to school, but right now the virtual way has to be the safest way because you're not burying me and I'm not burying you. And just dealing with that dynamic and trying to navigate that, it's just delicate.
Yeah, and that's definitely a tough thing. It's like you, man. I definitely the Superman syndrome is like I can do it all, right? Even shoot, man. When I ruptured my Achilles a few months back, I was trying to get up on my feet and go outside and cut my lawn just because I feel like I got to go do it for my family to have this lawn looking nice, for my daughter to go outside and play and things like that. But like you say, it's definitely tough when you're dealing with children. Like, is it safe to go back right now? And we'll never know. But then the question is, when will it be safe, right? How long will this pandemic last? Will it be 2021 and we sit and still having the same conversation or what? Like realistically.
And what's the impact long term if we don't go back? Like that's the thing. Sunday, I know you were burning to say something. I feel like we're back in 2009. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's difficult. I think school leaders are in a difficult position because I like to say that school leaders are middle managers. So you get information from, you know, powers that be, and you have to find a way to trickle it down and to make it palatable for staff. And sometimes I think that in the situation, you're trying to kind of make it work when people are just thinking, how is this going to work? You know what I mean? And I think there's principals already have an overwhelming amount of responsibility, but when it comes to this pandemic, you're now talking about, as you know was stated, literally life or death, because while some people with healthy immune systems, most people will be able to fight the virus. You know, you think about the staff member who also lives with their mom, and then if they get sick and their mom gets sick, the mom could potentially die. I mean, that's a lot of weight to have on your shoulders. And I think that as a principal, I always think about worst case scenarios and I sort of backwards plan from there. Like, the worst thing that could happen is this. And when you have a worst thing that could happen being someone dying or someone getting sick, and it's sort of like on your watch, even though, you know, you don't really have a way of tracing it, in some you know, in some ways you can't really trace it. You know what I mean? You don't always know where somebody got it from. You can't really tell whether they got it from the school or if they were out. But I think that is just an overwhelming amount of pressure that, you know, school leaders are under. And I think that the best guidance I would give is, I feel like I really have just taken a stance of like, people need to do whatever they feel is safe and whatever is going to be best for their families. And that is going to look different for everyone. I think that we are in a place where I definitely think being out of school at this time is going to have a negative impact long term. But, you know, I think this is an opportunity for us to really start thinking about how to, you know, radically revolutionize education. Because the reality is that when we were coming in person, we weren't knocking it out the park for all kids anyway. So at this point, you know, I'm hoping that when we get out of this space, we're going to think about doing some things differently, because there are a lot of things that were not working. But I think because of the commitment to the idea of doing school and the construct of what that has looked like has remained the same for so long, you know, I think people have not been willing to part with the traditional ways of looking at some of these things outside of like, oh, we're going to open a charter. That's novel. No, it's not. We need to make sure that all kids in all schools are thriving. And the way is not to take kids out of one and put them, it has to be everyone. And so now we're finding that the most vulnerable kids, it's sort of like this decision is being made for them, but it's like, hey, you could have made some better decisions for vulnerable kids a long time ago, like extra interventions, mental health staff in schools, like non-negotiables around those things, and those moves haven't been made. So the only thing I can think is, I hope that this pushes the needle where people say, like, we really need to think of this differently, because education in some places, you know, in spaces hasn't been working. So what better time than now to really kind of think about it differently and revolutionize. But I think that coming back is everybody's personal decision. And while there is pressure, people have to do what is best for them individually. And that's going to look different for everyone. And I think that the last thing I'll say is that educators are always in a place of self-sacrifice. And I think that is a toxic way of people operating, and it is a way that leads to burnout. And so in this situation, people have to take care of themselves first. If you can come in person and you feel good about that, then do it. If you don't want to come in person, then you figure out how to not do that. But we educators always need to try to prioritize taking care of their well-being, because you can't show it for kids if you don't take care of yourself.
Okay.
So true. Maisha, I'm high-fiving you in. You're on mute.
Of course I am. So just to piggyback on what Sunday's saying, I mean, I really like what she said, that concept of like educators, we are always in this this vibe of self-sacrifice, right? Like we are always asked to put everybody before ourselves in many cases. And we do it willingly and we do it with passion because we love what we do and we love our children, we love our communities, and we love our families. I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we have to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're the whole version of ourselves in order to show up best in the classroom for our students. And I think when we are thinking about asking educators to come back that are apprehensive, that are scared, that are, uneasy about coming back, that educator is not going to be the best version of themselves when they show up, if they have to show up in person. And I know personally for me, I need every educator that shows up in front of children, whether it be virtually or whether it be in person, to be the best version of ourselves, because that's what our students and our families deserve. And they don't deserve anything less than that. So if we're unable to ensure that when we return back, that every person will be at least very close to being the best version of themselves, I think we have to rethink, like, is this really helpful? And I think to your point, Quinyon, like we are going to see the detrimental effects of this pandemic, not only this year, not only next year, but for many years to come. Because we've been out of school in the traditional setting for many, many months, right? Since March. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that the ways in which we're going to see virtual schooling fail for students have been ways that school has failed for students for decades, and nobody has done anything, right? So this is not new. There's going to be a gap. Students that traditionally haven't been failed are going to be failed now. And it's unfortunate that it takes something as large as a pandemic like this for us actually to acknowledge this, because we've had students who have been part of this opportunity gap, right? Educational gap, whatever colloquialism we want to call it, but they have been left behind, right? To use No Child Left Behind, they've been left behind for so many years, whether it be technology, whether it be resources, whether it be quality educators. And it's unfortunate that it has to take this for us to start talking about the gaps in a more serious way and making sure that we're putting our money where our mouth is and our resources where we're talking about, because the reality is that for students in communities like I serve that may have a gap between other communities like west of the park here in DC, those students are going to be the ones that are most affected by this pandemic, and most affected by a teacher if the teacher is uncomfortable with coming back and not feeling comfortable with it. We have to, as educators, I mean, if there's one lesson I learned during the pandemic, it was self-care for myself in a way that I haven't done. Honestly, this is my 12th year as a principal. I haven't done self-care practices at least in the last 8 years. And I've learned for myself that I can show up and be the best version of myself when I'm focusing on self-care like I am now. And I would hope that we would extend that to our educators in all settings, whether they be our educators, whether they be our mental health support staff, because when you're the best version of yourself, you can show up best for your kids, whether that's virtually or whether that's in person.
Yeah, I think all of the comments have been extremely important. One thing I'll say, Maisha, I think for many principals, and I'm just thinking about the number of colleagues that I have an opportunity to speak to, they often forget self-care, and self-care becomes the thing that they have to do, but it's not necessarily impacting or changing who they are emotionally. And so, this idea of resting when typically you don't rest because at night, those things that keep you up are keeping you up. And so your rest is often violated, dealing with the traumas of the community and or that one student that you are identifying needs and supports because they need it, or that teacher that has bared their soul to you and you want to offer them something that you're just not sure to offer. And so I think I just applaud and commend you for saying, I am going to have this work-life balance, because we talk about it, we read about it, but the idea of having it doesn't always happen. And I'm just thinking about like my labor of love, working till midnight and waking up at 5 o'clock and, or, oftentimes before that. And you do it because you believe that you have to in order for you to get the job done, when in fact, the job is always going to be there.
Yeah, I'm actually now unapologetic about prioritizing myself. 100% unapologetic, because I feel like I am a better leader because I have really worked over these past like 7 months to prioritize what makes me most effective. Being tired, being stressed actually doesn't make me most effective. And that's the same for teachers as well.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Oh no, we have 5 minutes left. And so in 5 minutes, I can't let us in without us talking about some things that are truly plaguing our country. I'm thinking of the Black Lives Matters movement. You know, a few weeks ago, Breonna Taylor and that travesty of them not being convicted. I'm also thinking about election is coming November 3rd. Please, we have to vote. It's not an option. Are you weaving these societal ills into your day-to-day conversations with colleagues, or is it something that you're not talking about?
I could take this one really quick. For me, it's different because of the county that I'm in now. I try to still be myself when it comes to talking about these issues. And I think the beauty of teaching government this year, I can tie it all in with government, right? So I take the time, like I mentioned earlier, last week, I scrapped the lesson and said, forget the lesson. Let's talk about some of these things that's going on. The school I'm at now, I'm teaching a lot more students, Hispanic students than I have before. There's a large community of Hispanic students in that school, so a lot of the political debate goes to them is dealing with ICE issues. With the Black students, of course, we're dealing with Black Lives Matter and those topics. And I try to open the floor for the students to talk about those things. And when they talk about it, I can sit back and observe them and let them speak what they speak, and then I can offer my expertise or my opinion. And always, push to students that they are young adults, right? They're growing into becoming, because I teach high school, they are young adults in my view. And I try to teach them that you have to be able to have and formulate your own viewpoint. You don't have to go with what mom and dad said you should believe when it comes to your political belief. If you believe something and you have some type of evidence to stand on it, stand on it. And that's going to be your sword, down your sword.
Melvin T. Bond II, are you talking about Black Lives Matters?
Man, I want to talk about it all. So I know at the end of the day, being here in Baltimore, Black Lives Matter has taken on a life of its own, and that you don't just have communities of Black and Brown, but you have communities that are unified across the city, standing up when Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, and I mean that's coming from everywhere. And so, kind of intertwining that with your families and the students about how to engage with police officers and letting our kids know that all police officers aren't bad. Your school police officers that you see every day, the way that you engage with them, there's some positive police officers out there that you can have a great relationship with. It's hard to get the kids not to not to kind of get so internalize everything they're seeing on TV and internalize the bad things, that remind them of the good that's here in the world. There's good in the world. You got to remember that it's good in the world. And Black Lives Matter, at the end of the day, it's time. It's time for us to be recognized. It's time for us to have equitable lens inside of the classroom, for us to be able to have a conversation and have a seat at the table, but also be offered the opportunity to try. We're talking about just being able to try. And I can't think of a better time or a better way to do that than right now, and getting out there on November 3rd and making sure that you vote and you understand what your purpose is in life.
I appreciate that. Maisha and Sunday, any parting words for the good of the people?
Yeah, I'll just say, just to piggyback on what these two brothers have said about the Black Lives Matter movement, I think as leaders in schools, we have to create spaces for people to be able to process what's happening in our world in real time. I know when the George Floyd event happened, we allowed space for people just to talk about it. Right? Because if that, again, it's like a child coming in that has something that happened at school. If you're thinking, at home into school, if you're thinking about that, you're blocked from learning, or you can be blocked. If you're thinking about as a Black person, and I lead a school that's primarily Black with a primarily Black staff, If that's what you're thinking about, you're not going to, again, show up as the best version of yourself. And I think it's also an opportunity for our staff members who are not Black to really hear and take an empathetic listening stance to us, because sometimes we can be in echo chambers of people that agree and are yes men, yes women to us. And I think by creating those spaces as leaders, we can create opportunities for not only our viewpoint to be heard, but to hear divergent opinions, right? Some people that may not think the way that we have. And I think that's important for us to grow and develop. And I think as leaders, we have to push ourselves to make those opportunities available for staff. For me, it's very difficult because I have a cousin who, when I was a teenager, was killed by LAUSD in the same way, LAPD, in the same way that many of the men and women have been killed over the past year, right? So it's almost a trigger for me whenever this happens, because I think about my cousin who was killed by LAPD in a very similar way. But I push myself because I know that one of the ways I was able to push past anger, resentment, was to have spaces to talk about this with people that could help me process. And so I think as leaders, if we can create those spaces without them becoming adversarial, without them becoming finger pointing, but for us to sit and create listening spaces where we can truly hear each other out and build that empathy muscle, I think that's part of our role and responsibility as leaders, as we're leading in a time where we're in what they're calling now the racial reconciliation. I think that's funny because, you know, this has been happening for years. My cousin was killed in the 90s by LAPD. And this isn't new for us, but now we have social media. We have many ways to get our message out. And I'm glad that people are listening. I'm glad that people that traditionally wouldn't be open to listening are now open to listening. And I hope that we can continue this message, not only to our staff, but to our students and families as well.
Absolutely. Sunday, anything burning?
Nothing really burning. I'm just saying, go vote. Like, I just think this is a very, very, very serious time. And just that one decision on the part of just many Americans could really change our trajectory as a country for the better or worse. So that's all I will say. I think that I'm a person who likes to talk about and process things, but I think that I'm also a person who, like, I'm still processing myself and thinking about like how I feel, because it's like showing up as a leader versus how you show up and support staff, and you don't want to come off like too angry or too radical. So I think I'm always like kind of managing myself, and as I'm still processing, I try to give myself permission to be in a processing mode, and also give other people permission to do that as well. So opening spaces for people to talk or not, and respecting that they don't want to do it. But I think the biggest thing, I always try to tell my staff, like, now that we talked about it, so now what? Like, where's the action? And I think the biggest action that we can take right now is to make sure that people go out and vote.
Yep.
Absolutely. Go vote November 3rd. We are counting on you. Thank you so much for taking a look and joining us with Inside Look with Dr. Scott. And we will see you again next Wednesday. To our special panelists, thank you again so much for joining us. And we look forward to the next time we have an opportunity to be together.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Peace.
Bye, everyone.